Thank you for joining me for week 3 of our journey from hungry ghost to being human. This week we'll be looking at applied ethical intelligence, or how the 5 precepts can keep us out of trouble. But first, please join me for a guided meditation. A meditation that's deliberately intended to cultivate calm and pleasant abiding in the here and now. So we take an upright, dignified posture, a posture that represents your heart's desire to awaken, an outward manifestation of your heart's desire to move away from suffering, to move towards the end of suffering. So upright, dignified, alert. But just as importantly, not too rigid, comfortable, and relaxed. If it's comfortable for you, you might let your eyes gently close. Let your jaw relax. Let your shoulders drop back to open up the heart area. And allow your hands to rest easily. We might start by taking a very deep breath in, full breath, and then a very long, slow, deliberate breath out, feeling the breath in the whole body. One more time, a very full, deep breath in, completely filling the lungs, and a very long, slow, deliberate breath out. The basic instructions for serenity breath meditation, or tranquility meditation, or the cultivation of stillness, is that we follow each and every breath. So the Buddha suggested that when breathing in, we're fully aware of the in-breath. And when breathing out, we're fully aware of the out-breath. So it can help to fully follow the breath from the nose, the nostrils, down through the throat, through the chest, and into the belly. And then follow the outward journey, the out-breath from the belly, up through the stomach and the chest, through the throat, and through the nose. So following the breath from nostril to navel on the in-breath, following the out-breath from navel to nostril. Breathing in, I'm fully aware of the in-breath. Breathing out, I'm fully aware of the out-breath. Breathing in, I'm fully aware of the in-breath. And breathing out, I'm fully aware of the out-breath. As well as serenity breath meditation, bringing stillness of mind and stillness of body. It's also used in the deliberate cultivation of joy and bliss. And there are a couple of phrases that the Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh uses that are very helpful in this regard. We might whisper at the back of our mind silently, breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. And you might think of all the most pleasing Buddha statues that we see. Generally, the Buddha has this small smile on his face. So you're encouraged also to have a smile in your mind, a smile in your heart, and a smile on your face. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Breathing in, calm. Breathing out, smile. On the in-breath, calm. On the out-breath, smile. Once again, I'd like to welcome you on this journey together from hungry ghost to being human, hopefully without going through hell. Thank you all for joining me again this week. Those who have been here before, those who weren't the previous weeks. The previous 2 weeks' recordings are available on YouTube. I just wanted to summarise where we started and where we went last week and where we are this week. I'm going to see if I can, if possible, if I can share screens again. So the title of this series of talks is From Hungry Ghost to Being Human, with a subtitle of Without Going Through Hell. And we mentioned briefly about these. I'm not sure if it doesn't show up. I'm trying to highlight bits of the screen with a special pen, but it's not working. The idea being that these heaven and hell realms in traditional Buddhist cosmology are merely mind states that we pass through from moment to moment, and it's certainly very useful to consider them as such and to make note of where we dwell, whether we dwell in the heaven realms or the various hell realms. And then I shared with you this idea that for me, these are the things that I wish someone had told me 23 years ago when I woke up sober one morning, and simply not knowing who I was or what I would do. But the first starting point of my awakening, as it were, was truth. The truth was that I was an alcoholic. The truth was that wasn't working for me anymore. The truth was that I was going to have to change something. And I made a commitment at my kitchen table not to drink or take drugs for the rest of my life. And that was the seed of where I find myself today, and it's a seed that's still being watered and nurtured, and is still producing lots of fruit. So the first week we looked at some Buddhist truths, truthfulness, and this idea of truth as a commitment, an aspiration, something to be aspired to. And then last week we touched on the Buddhist truths of impermanence and non-self, and we touched on the Four Noble Truths of that there is suffering in life. Not all life is suffering, but just suffering exists. That a lot of our suffering, our unnecessary suffering, is caused by wanting things to be other than what they are, craving for excitement, stimulation, novelty, craving to be someone, something, craving for status, craving for continued existence, or craving to be no one, craving to fade away, craving for it all to end, essentially craving for things to be other than what they are. But then the third noble truth says, well, if we work at it, there is a way out of avoidable suffering, and the fourth noble truth lays out a potential path. So, and then last week we focused on dana, generosity, the cultivation of a generosity of heart, of mind, and of giving, and how important that is in forming contentment and gratitude, and how generosity then plays itself forward into tonight's topic, which is the ethical behaviour, or the cultivation of harmlessness. I'm just going to flick through these slides. So, it's the Buddha said, "I teach suffering and the end of the suffering." And lots of people put emphasis on, well, he talks about suffering, but more often he talked about the end of suffering and that it is possible. He just said life is stressful, life is difficult, life is unfair. I mentioned last week or the week before about the abstinence, the difference between abstinence and abandonment, at least for me, and it probably doesn't work in languages other than English, I'm not sure. But abstinence was keeping, while I thought I was being abstinent, I was miserable. And it wasn't until I actually abandoned what I thought I wanted to do that I found any freedom. And in Buddhist terms, that abandonment might be known as renunciation, as letting something go. I tried to emphasize last week the importance of keeping things in mind. This is what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is remembering to remember whatever is most important for this moment, whatever is most skillful and wise for this moment. And the Buddha makes a point of whatever we keep in mind inclines our mind, inclines our heart. So what the mind frequently thinks and ponders becomes the inclination of the heart. And that's why he places so much emphasis on the heart practices of friendliness, of compassion, of joy, and of equanimity. And although not included in those practices, equally of forgiveness and generosity. So this idea of mindfulness as being a process of remembering to remember, a present moment recollection. Where is my mind now? How should I behave now? How do I respond to this current situation? So we might use this phrase of right now it's like this to bring an affectionate inquiry into this moment. Equally, we can accept this moment for what it is, and not only accept it, but be creative with our response to this moment. And a little acronym I like to use is MARA, that mindful awareness responds appropriately. And maybe in a future talk, we'll explore this character of Mara, this personification of unskillful, unwholesome behaviour. So, as my view, my practice of this Buddhist Dharma, these Buddhist teachings, views it as a big jigsaw puzzle, and we start putting bits of the puzzle in, and we start to get a picture. The more bits of the puzzle we put in, the clearer the picture becomes. And everything is very much related to everything else. So generosity of truth leads on to generosity. Generosity leads on to precepts. Precepts lead on to kindness, leads on to forgiveness and fellowship. So everything it overlaps. So there are many pieces of the puzzle, but even with a few, we can start to get a good picture. The Buddha offers us again a bit like generosity in Eastern countries in Asia, where Buddhism is taught. The precepts are taught and generosity is taught before anyone would be particularly taught meditation. Having an ethical foundation is considered a prerequisite for sitting on the cushion. But the precepts, these 5 suggestions that the Buddha offers us, often considered to be of Buddhist origin, but from my understanding and from how I read the early Buddhist texts, is that they're universal. They're just common sense for how to avoid individual suffering and suffering within communities, suffering within our societies. And as the Buddha presents these suggestions, he says that they're ancient, they're traditional. What I'll do is I'll refer you to this. Hopefully you see it there. Now this book is downloadable from the 5th Precept website, as same place as the Hungry Ghost booklet, and we'll be going through forgiveness practice in I think 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time, and it'd be handy to have this book, if you print this book out. But in here, I go into the precepts in quite some detail, because so much suffering is caused by not following the precepts, not living in harmony with these suggestions, that I've formulated the forgiveness practice around how we harm ourselves, how we harm others, and how we've been harmed by people not living in harmony with these precepts, with these suggestions. So these suggestions are common sense. And let me just read out the introduction the Buddha gives when he offers this suggestion. He says, now there are these 5 gifts, these 5 great gifts: original, long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated from the beginning, that are not open to suspicion. They will never be open to suspicion, and they're not faulted by knowledgeable contemplatives and Brahmins. So anyone sensible, anyone with intelligence, could not fault these suggestions. So I don't want to spend, I could spend several hours on these, and on retreat, we spend at least 5 separate sessions going through each of these precepts and going through forgiveness practice for each of these precepts. But I'm just going to give you a bus stop tour, a whistle stop tour through these suggestions. And I'll start with the first precept. And I must emphasize that these are suggestions. These aren't commandments, they're not rules. The precept, or the precepts, if you want to call them that, they translate something along the lines of, I will train myself to avoid doing this. I will train myself to abstain from doing this. So it's about training, individual training, not I won't. Although when it for some of us, when it comes to intoxicants, we might take it upon ourselves to strengthen the precept to an absolute commitment, but then that's a matter for the individual. But let me start with this first precept, and the Buddha says, there is the case where a disciple of the noble ones, abandoning the taking of life, abstains from taking life, and in doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. In giving freedom from danger and freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in that limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. So not only is it a gift, this first precept of not harming ourselves, not harming others, is not only a gift to ourselves, but is a gift to everyone. It's a gift to our community, it's a gift to our society. In a different presentation of the precepts, the Buddha says, now I will tell you a layman's duty. Following it, a lay disciple would be virtuous. He should not kill a living being, nor cause it to be killed, nor to incite another to kill. Do not injure any being, either weak or strong, in the world. So this emphasis on not harming, not killing. The Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, he takes this precept and he puts his own spin, his own presentation of this precept. Thich Nhat Hanh says, reverence for life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion, and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world. In my thinking or in my way of life, seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and indiscriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism and dogmatism in myself and in the world. What a lovely way of rephrasing this first precept. This idea then that we don't go around harming ourselves, we don't go around harming others. I will move through the precepts, and I'll take a deeper look at them. So there is some repetition here, but the early Buddhist monks thrived on repetition, and they had a much better memory than we have. So furthermore, abandoning taking what is not given. The disciple of noble ones abstains from taking what is not given. In doing so, he gains a freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. In giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in that freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. So don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. This cultivates contentedness for what we have, and an antidote to envy, antidote to greed. In an alternative or a different sutta, a different talk, the Buddha says, a disciple should avoid taking anything from anywhere, knowing it to belong to another. He should not steal nor incite another to steal. He should completely avoid theft. And Thich Nhat Hanh puts it slightly differently. He says, aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking and acting. I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And I will share my time, energy and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering, that true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion, and that running after wealth, fame, power and sensual pleasures can bring much suffering and despair. I am aware that happiness depends on my mental attitude and not on external conditions, and that I can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering that I already have more than enough. I already have more than enough conditions to be happy. I am committed to practicing right livelihoods so that I can reduce the suffering of living beings on earth and stop contributing to climate change. The third precept, and as we haven't got time for me to talk about each individual precept in too much detail, but the third precept is presented often as avoiding sexual misconduct. And I normally give a talk on how prevalent sexual harm through sexual misconduct is, and how the drive, our sexual drive, as human beings, as living as a species, is huge, and it can get us into serious trouble. It can be a beautiful thing, but it can be a very harmful thing. But also the third precept isn't just about refraining from sensual from sexual misconduct. It's also about refraining from sensual misconduct, misconduct of the other senses, sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, so overeating, or overindulgence in all of our senses. The Buddha puts it like this, but very specifically around sex. Furthermore, abandoning illicit sex, the disciple of the noble ones abstains from illicit sex. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. And in giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in that limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. The alternative sutta says, a wise man should avoid unchastity as he would avoid falling into a pit of glowing charcoal. If unable to lead a celibate life, he should not go to another's wife. Thich Nhat Hanh puts it very lovely when he says, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others, I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep long-term commitment made known to my family and my friends. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. Seeing that body and mind are one, I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and cultivating loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness, which are the 4 basic elements of true love, for my greater happiness and the greater happiness of others. Practicing true love that will continue beautifully into the future. Correctly. So the 4th suggestion the Buddha offers us, and this one is so hard to do, so hard to do. It's about speaking truthfully, speaking kindly. He says, furthermore, abandoning lying, the disciple of noble ones abstains from lying. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. And in giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains his share in that limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. The other sutta that I picked out, he says, having entered a royal court or the company of people, he should not speak lies. He should not speak lies himself, nor incite others to do so. He should completely avoid falsehood. And Thich Nhat Hanh elaborates by saying, aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of suffering in myself and in the other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help myself and the other person to transform suffering and to see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain, and not to utter words that can cause division or discourse. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness. Excuse me. So, this 4th precept, this 4th suggestion is very much linked to where we started on week 1 in truth and truthfulness, and this commitment to being honest to ourselves and honest with other people. And then the last precept, the last suggestion. Furthermore, abandoning the use of intoxicants, the disciple of noble ones abstains from taking intoxicants. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. In giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in that limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. And from the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Dhammacakka Sutta. A layman who has chosen to practice this Dharma should not indulge in the drinking of intoxicants. He should not drink them nor encourage others to do so, realizing that it leads to madness. Through intoxication, foolish people perform evil deeds and cause other heedless people to do likewise. We should avoid intoxication, this occasion for demerit, which stupefies the mind and is the pleasure of foolish people. I think he doesn't mince his words now. And Thich Nhat Hanh puts it like this: aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the 4 kinds of nutriments, namely edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. I am determined not to gamble or to use alcohol, drugs, or any other products which contain toxins, such as certain websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. I will practice coming back to the present moment, to be in touch with the refreshing, healing, and nourishing elements in me and around me, not letting regrets and sorrow drag me back into the past, nor letting anxieties, fear, or craving pull me out of the present moment. I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate into being and consuming in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society, and the earth. And I'll just finish off as I started with the words of the Buddha when he says, at this point, this is the 5th gift, the 5th great gift, original, long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated from the beginning, that is not open to suspicion, will never be open to suspicion, and is unfaulted by knowledgeable contemplatives and Brahmins. I'm sorry about the repetitive nature of that, but I hope it emphasizes these 5 suggestions, and the fact that they're not Buddhist, they're universal. These were already ancient when the Buddha presented them in his doctrine, in his teaching. They're very practical, they're pragmatic, they cultivate harmony in societies, in families, societies, and communities. So, but they're not. It's importantly, they're not commandments. They're not rules. The Buddhist teachings were always about our experiential practice. So, if I go around killing people or punching people, is that for my good? Is that for my welfare, or does it lead to misery and suffering? If I go around stealing things, if I take things that haven't been freely given to me, or if I withhold things that I should be passing on, not just material things, but if I withhold love and respect, is that for my benefit and welfare, or is it for misery? Does it lead to misery and suffering? If I go around with complete disregard to sexual norms, just self-centered pleasure, is that for my benefit and welfare, or does it lead to misery and suffering for me and those around me? If I go around telling untruths, speaking angrily, gossiping and slander, does it lead to misery and suffering, or does it lead to my benefit and welfare for myself and those around me? And lastly, if I live my life intoxicated, which isn't really living life, and in some traditions, being drunk is considered a breach of the first suggestion, because if you're drunk, you're not alive, you're killing yourself. But if I go around intoxicated and not in my right mind, is that for my benefit and welfare, or is it does it lead to suffering and misery? So these are experiential suggestions. What do they do for you? It's a very personal inquiry, what might be termed an ethical inquiry. So we're asked to keep these ethics, these personal ethics, in mind. There's a lovely talk the Buddha gave to his son, Now, I have to be careful of time now because I can't see a clock. There's a lovely talk that the Buddha gave to his son, Rahula. Rahula was about 11 at the time, I think. And Rahula must have done something wrong for the Buddha to call him and speak to him. And the Buddha said, you know, before you, as you think, before you speak, before you do anything, consider, will this thought, will these words, will this action cause harm, lead to my affliction, or will it not? Will it lead to my affliction? Will it afflict me? Will it afflict others? Will it afflict both of us? And if it will, then don't have that thought. Don't say those words. Don't carry out that action. If while you are thinking, if while you're speaking, if while you're carrying out an action, you keep in mind, are these thoughts, are these words, are these actions causing myself harm, others harm, or both of us harm? And if they are, then you should stop those actions, those thoughts, those words, that action straight away. And then he says, after you've thought something, after you've spoken, after you've formed an act, you should reflect backwards. Did those thoughts, did those words, did those actions harm me, or did they harm others? And if they harmed you, then you should commit not to do them again. And if they didn't, then you should pat yourself on the back and say, you did a good job. So this keeping something in mind, we keep going back to these same themes, keeping something in mind, remembering to remember, recollecting what needs to be recollected, so that we have an appropriate response to our present moment experience, if we're aware of what our present moment experience is. So we become mindful of our thoughts, mindful of our words, and mindful of our actions. One of the lovely images that the Buddha gives us of mindfulness, perhaps I should use the Buddhist word, the Pali word is sati. Yes, sati, so mindfulness. One of the images he gives us is of a citadel, a great citadel with 6 gates and 6 gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers, their job is to keep out the unhelpful, the unwholesome, and only to let in the wholesome and helpful. And these 6 gates, these 6 guards, are mindfulness, and they're protecting us from the senses. They're protecting us from their sense impressions, letting in the wholesome and skillful, keeping out the unwholesome, unskillful. So our behaviour, and I heard it put very nicely when listening to a recent podcast, might be considered our desire, our commitment, our aspiration to move through life without harming, to remain blameless, might be considered applied ethical intelligence. And I thought it was a rather lovely expression, that knowing what leads to suffering, knowing what leads away from suffering, and applying it in our life, living by it. The ethical aspect of mindfulness. Mindfulness, certainly in the traditional Buddhist sense, is not ethically neutral. Mindfulness is always in the service of moving away from suffering, always in the service of relieving suffering. So mindfulness plays a very important part in our applied ethical intelligence. Mindfulness cares. Mindfulness is not neutral. So these suggestions to move through life without causing harm, without harming ourselves, without harming others, they're both personal rights and they're community rights. So within a community, and you often find this in action at retreat centres. Everyone has the right not to be subject to violence. Everyone has the right to not to be harmed, to feel safe. Everyone has the right to have their personal property respected. Everyone has the right to have their sexuality respected and to be not to fear unnecessary advances or unwanted advances. Everyone has the right to be spoken to truthfully and kindly, not to be subject to gossip or slander. And everyone has the right not to be, not to come into contact with intoxicants and intoxicated people. So it really was a whistle-stop tour, but there are a number of recurring themes in there that we looked at already, particularly around. So if we choose not to live in harmony with these suggestions, there will be karmic consequences. Bright action, bright thoughts, bright words, bright actions generally lead to bright results. But dark words, dark thoughts, dark actions generally lead to dark and unpleasant results. So there's a karmic consequence to how we think, how we speak, and how we act. If we wish to be mindful, then we must bear in mind that Buddhist mindfulness at least cares. Buddhist mindfulness is ethically imbued, is ethically positive. These suggestions and their results are born out of generosity and born out of universal friendliness or loving kindness. And these suggestions, these precepts, are a personal response to our present moment experience. So the precepts are completely entwined with the rest of the Buddhist path, but in the West, sometimes no credence is placed on them at all. A short quote from the Dhammapada, which is a collection of short sayings of the Buddha. Whoever destroys life, disregards the truth, is sexually irresponsible, takes what is not rightfully theirs, and heedlessly indulges in drugs, destroys the very roots of their own life. So there's a couple of pages on this topic in the Hungry Ghost booklet if you'd like to have a look. And then the rest of my notes relate to going through these topics on retreat. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew says, how lovely keeping the precepts builds healthy esteem and confidence in oneself and the practice. And that's quite right. Let me see if I can find a time.
8:30.
Okay, we're actually doing very well for time. So it's 8:30. So time for questions and answers. Oh, is that Brenda? Did you want to say something, Brenda?
No, it was all right. I was saying 8:30.
Okay.
You were looking there.
Vince, Dermot here. Can I ask a question, Vince?
Yeah, you can. I didn't get your name. Sorry.
Dermot.
Dermot. Hiya.
Hiya. I love listening to that talk, and I agree with everything. You know what I mean? I agree with Buddhist precepts and all. I'm familiar with them long before I got into the reason I'm here with the fifthprecept.org is first my sobriety and how to live. And what's going to be, apart from reflection, what's my vehicle to make this change happen? Is it through meditation, or what's going to make the chip away at this to make my adherence to precepts better, etc.? Do you know what I mean? Is it through meditation, or is it through reflection, or is it through sangha, or that's all really?
It's all interrelated, Dermot. So mindfulness is about keeping something in mind. What we keep, the things we keep in mind. you know, our thoughts are so important to us. What we think we become. With our thoughts, we create the world. So, with what we think we become, as a human being, I'm selfing. I'm building a self moment to moment. What I'm thinking, how I'm responding to my environment. I'm building this. Whether it's Vince, the teacher, Vince, the partner, Vince, the dad. I'm building this self on a moment-to-moment basis. And at the same time, I'm building my world at the moment-to-moment basis. With my thoughts, I create my world. What my mind frequently thinks and ponders becomes the inclination of my heart and of my mind. So that's why the Buddha placed so much emphasis on mindfulness. Is, you know, what do you think of me? Are you aware of your present experience? Are you aware of where your mind is? Mindfulness being able to recollect what needs to be recollected, remembering to remember what needs to be recollected. I have to remember in the early days of my recovery from alcohol, I continued to go to the pub. Because I thought that's where my family was. I thought that's where my life was. And of course, when I went to the pub, I had to remember I do not drink anymore. So that was something important to remember. And I wasn't aware of the precepts at the time, but it would have been a question. You know, I would have been remembering the fifth precept: I don't drink, so I don't want to harm myself. I don't want to harm others. So so therefore, it comes to the point that the way to practice the precepts, or the way to keep the precepts in mind, is to develop mindfulness. And the way to develop mindfulness is not just by practicing meditation, but it's also by being in community and living in community in harmony with those suggestions. It's by keeping in mind the aspiration to be generous, because the precepts are born out of generosity. They are keeping in mind, inclining our mind towards the Brahma Viharas, the four faces of love, what the Thich Nhat Hanh there called the four true faces of love. So universal friendliness, compassion, joy and appreciation, and equanimity, or he calls it inclusiveness. And the practice of universal friendliness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, that the Buddha mentioned it so often, and that they're deeply related to the precepts, not causing harm. So each and every experience I have, each present moment experience, what's the wise response? As the Buddha said to Rahula, are your thoughts, are your words, are your actions harming you, or are they harming anyone else? And if they are, perhaps it's a practice.
Yeah, gotcha.
Sometimes I forget, and I'm not perfect, but I am committed to moving through life, leaving as little residue, as little damage behind as possible. If that's and of course, ultimately, formal meditation practice, sitting on the cushion, keep bringing, for example, breath meditation, keep bringing the mind back to the breath, back to the breath, stop the mind wandering off, is training the untamed mind, where we know where our mind is. We don't let the mind go off wandering. Because the mind wants to go out prowling. One teacher uses this term, the mind will go off prowling, looking for things to be delighted in, looking for things to be interested in, looking for things to distract it. So the formal meditation, where I'm going to keep coming back to the breath, or whatever our object of meditation is, I'm going to keep coming back. I've lost it, I'll come back, just like gently like a puppy, bring our mind back to our object of meditation. And we train the mind to do our bidding. And we get to know where our mind is. We get to know. So this applied ethical intelligence says, oh, you know, my mind's here, actually this isn't a good place, this is going to take me off in the wrong direction. Or my mind is here, and this is you know, I might be listening to a podcast, a very interesting, wholesome, skillful podcast, and think to myself, I'm quite pleased with this makes me feel comfortable with it. It's probably too much of an answer.
No, it's a good answer, man. It's a good answer. Moment to moment, I create my reality. That's good enough for me.
Rather than one day at a time, it is quite literally, you know, one breath at a time, one step at a time.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
One life at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Vince. Thank you.
Thank you, Dermot. I think there's a few questions here. I'm going to say, keeping the fifth precept is non-negotiable for all Buddhists. The other four are without question. But I have met people who use the word excess as a rationalization. What gives? Thank you for your wisdom. Excess as a rationalization. Hello, do you happen to know what the book is that you put Thich-Nhat Hanh quotes from? Thanks. Okay, so first of all, the Thich Nhat Hanh quotes can be found on Thich Nhat Hanh's website, Plum Village website, and those quotes in various different varieties of those quotes are available in different Thich Nhat Hanh books. But I think I got those quotes from the Plum Village website. The fifth precept being interpreted as, I know some people interpret it as, it's not about taking intoxicants, it's about not becoming intoxicated. So as long as I don't become intoxicated, I can continue to do what I want to do. And for me, for my personal experiential wisdom, my applied ethical intelligence tells me alcohol and I don't mix. So for me, there's no half measures. I just do not have alcohol or other intoxicants in my life. It would be unskillful, unwise, not very good for me, not very good for people around me. So the fifth precept, as I apply it to my life, is an absolute, I just don't go there. That's not to say that I haven't, over the last 23 years, picked up a chocolate and it turned out to be an alcoholic liqueur. But, you know, I ate it, or ate them. There's been a couple of occasions I've had alcoholic liqueur chocolates. But I don't beat myself up and I don't go back for a second one. You know, that's it. Or sherry in a trifle, or alcohol in a tiramisu. None of it's done intentionally and by choice. I don't eat chocolates with alcohol in them. I don't eat trifles with alcohol in them. I don't eat tiramisu with alcohol in it. So I do steer clear. But if someone wants to play with words, if someone wants to say, well, you know, my interpretation is, you know, not to become intoxicated. It's not about taking intoxicants. It's about not becoming intoxicated. And if someone wants to interpret it that way, then it's none of my business at all. And that's their personal interpretation. If that leads to suffering for them or not, their benefit and welfare, it's up to them. You know, I found that, you know, fixed views and opinions can, as Thich Nhat Hanh said in one of his quotes, you know, holding on to fixed views and opinions can be harmful. So it's not my interpretation, but if it's someone else's interpretation, that's fine. In some the Tibetan traditions around intoxicants, for the individual to take intoxicants is a secondary offence. It's a minor offence. If I drink, if I'm a monastic even and I drink, you know, it's a secondary offence. But if I give alcohol to someone else, that's a primary offence, because then I'm harming that other person. It's a strange way to look at it. And of course, you know, if I said, well, I drink, but you shouldn't, or you know, it'd be a very unhelpful, unhealthy way. You know, I can happily tell you I don't drink and do not intend to drink. And I don't say, you know, I don't drink now because specifically because I'm a Buddhist. I don't want to do any harm. Not because I was an alcoholic. Just I'm leading a very different life now. I've renounced that part of lay life. It doesn't appeal to me. It didn't do me good, and I don't want to go back there. I'm very happy practicing the Buddhist or having this Buddhist practice, Buddhist-inspired, Buddhist-orientated practice that says I don't take intoxicants. We had a conversation last week, or I think it was last week, about self-identification as either a recovering addict or as an addict, and how holding on to self-identity might be helpful in some circumstances, might be unhelpful in other circumstances. And I said at the time, when I prefer not to call myself an addict, I prefer to identify as a recovered addict. And in the fifth precept, Sangha sit and share meetings, we don't identify with any addictions or states. But maybe I should start each talk with, hi, my name's Vince, and I'm in recovery. I'm in recovery from greed. I'm in recovery from hatred. I'm in recovery from delusion or ignorance. I'm in recovery from cravings, aversions, and confusion. And that's the truth. You know, I'm human. I'm on this path and happy to practice it the rest of my life. So I can't see the questions. I don't know.
Vince, didn't you once say that you have become disenchanted? Didn't you say that one time? I love that. Like you've come, at one point we're under the spell and no longer under the spell.
That's right. Is that Ken?
I love that. Yeah. This is Ken. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken, for prompting me. There's a chat question now. I'll look at it in a moment. Yeah, one of the synonyms, one of the points on the path to move away from suffering towards the end of suffering, for complete enlightenment, is this is to become disenchanted.
Yeah.
To break the spell, to see clearly. And I think that's a wonderful expression of you know, it's a bit like naming abstinence and abandonment, one keeping you a prisoner, one setting you free. Becoming disenchanted, breaking the spell of how we think things are, or how we're confined by our views and our opinions, and by society's the way society's set up. So yeah. So the practice of vipassana, of seeing clearly, of it is in the service of breaking that spell, becoming disenchanted. Is that what you mean, Ken? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think you used it before. It's sort of like waking up. You know, we're like, if I'm under the spell of alcohol or a drug or a delusion, I wake up.
Or just it's just this process of waking up, and yes, and in Japanese Zen stories, that the master would cut off the student's little finger and the student becomes suddenly enlightened. Well, I don't recommend that, but there is this process of seeing things clearly, and it's a gradual path, and I'm just a student on the path. And the whole purpose of the Hungry Ghost retreats and of these talks, fifth precept Sangha, is about sharing some of the things I wish someone had told me, had saved me. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. The Buddha didn't reinvent the precepts. He said they're already old and ancient, and here they are. He just represented them. The wheel of becoming, was already part of Hindu cosmology, and he just adopted it for his teachings. The Brahma Viharas, these 4 faces of love, are said to be pre-Buddhist as well. And the Buddha took useful teachings and represented them. He didn't always reinvent the wheel. I mean, he did present a lot of things that hadn't been presented before, like seeing life as a process, seeing this process of self-building, how we build our image of self that we therefore cling to and try to protect, how we build our world, how we see the world by what we think about, what we hold in mind, how we incline our heart. All of those things hadn't been presented before. And his own struggle, his own 6-year struggles, to find liberation, to find the end of suffering. He finally came to these, or he formulated these conclusions, and they work very well. Many people come into recovery having done much damage for themselves and others. When first coming to Buddhist practice, are there any tips to help the beginner build and have confidence that they can move beyond karma, suffering, and past actions? And then Ken asks, is it possible to come to recovery without Sangha? Okay, I can answer both of those. First of all, is it possible to recover without Sangha? Yes, it is. I tried it. It is possible, but it's not ideal. I think you have much more chance of success within a fellowship, whatever fellowship that might be. And we'll be talking about fellowship on week 7, and Sangha on week 7, and probably plenty of other things on week 7 as well. But yeah, it's useful to have Sangha. Are there any tips to help the beginner build and have confidence that they can move beyond karma and suffering from their own past actions? And I still didn't look at the name, I apologise. Yes, there are, and we'll be coming on to that next week, and we're going to look at the heart practices next week. For me, particularly, what helped so much was coming across Jack Cornfield's teaching on loving kindness in his book.
A Path with Heart, was it?
Thank you. A Path with Heart, yeah. And the chapter on loving kindness really woke me up. The idea that I could actually be kind to myself and friendly to myself was so liberating, and I hadn't come across that before. Certainly, being an Irish Catholic, if you love yourself, you go to hell. So that wonderful teaching. Love this coming across that. But since that point, since coming across loving kindness teaching over the last 23 years, there's the other faces of love as well. There's the compassion, there's the joy and appreciation, there's the equanimity, and they come as a package. They're not individual items. They're a package. And as it's becoming clearer and clearer to me, it's not just those 4 faces of love, traditional face of love, the traditional Brahma Vihara, but there's also generosity and there's forgiveness, a part of those heart practices. So linking on that 5-day Hungry Ghost retreat, called From Hungry Ghost to Being Human, we place great emphasis. We do practices of loving kindness and forgiveness all week long. 5 sessions of loving kindness, 5 sessions of forgiveness, because in early recovery, they're just so important. And of course, holding on and Satya, truth, says to recognize, to realize, to see something. And the truth of impermanence is, that was who I was. It's not who I am. It's not who I will be. And I can't fight that. So I may as well smile at it and embrace it. So yes, I was a crap husband. Yes, I was a crap dad. Yes, I was a miserable employee. But that was then. It's not now. It's not who I am now. It's not who I will be in the future. So we sow the good seeds and we nurture them, we water them, we take care of them, and we let the weeds go to, we let them die off in the heat or whatever, in the drought. I hope that makes some sort of sense. I'm just looking at the time now, if I can see the time. Okay, so we're going to move on to our closing meditation, a meditation that's loosely based around the Brahma Viharas, about bringing compassion and kindness to our present moment experience, not just compassion and kindness and joy to our relationships, but actually to our present moment experience. So if you'd like to mute your microphones, and if you want to leave your cameras on, you can do so. I'm going to taking a semi-formal posture. Perhaps a very deep breath in, very long, slow breath out. A whisper at the back of our mind. May I find stillness in the midst of chaos. May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. May I be safe and well in the midst of uncertainty. May I live with kindness in the midst of all that is difficult. Just check in with your heart center. What does it feel like to befriend yourself, to befriend your experience? If you find resistance or conflict there, then just bring more kindness to that. May I find stillness in the midst of chaos. May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. May I be safe and well in the midst of uncertainty. May I live with kindness in the midst of all that is difficult. Okay, so thank you. A sincere gratitude for your presence, for your practice, and for your patience with this format and the technology. I'd like to thank Jude for being our technical host. A reminder that these talks are given absolutely freely. with an open heart, open mind, and with open hands. I hope that someone may get benefit from for them. I suffered so much in those first couple of years of sobriety without Sangha, without knowing what I was doing or where I was going. So the idea of offering what I would have liked to have heard then, now, is really, really joyful for me. So these talks, Hungry Ghost Retreats, Fifth Precept website, is offered freely, really. And but as is the tradition, and has been for 2,600 years, if you'd like to contribute to my livelihood or towards these teachings, then that process of dana, you can find a link on the Hungry Ghost website or on the YouTube videos that will be published soon. So thank you very much for that. Next week's theme are the Brahma Viharas, are these four faces of love, these divine living places. So I hope you can join me then for an exploration of the divine abodes, the immeasurable, the four immeasurables. And I'll see you then. In the meantime, have a great week. The sit and share meeting tomorrow night at 8 o'clock UK time, and on Monday at 8 o'clock UK time, if you'd like to join us at the share meeting. If you'd like to unmute your microphone and say good night, you're very welcome to. And a sincere thank you.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all. Lovely to see you.
Take care.
Thanks, Vince. Thank you, Vince.
Mine gets better, Patrick.
Bye.
All right, poor dude.
Thanks, Vince. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.